If I don't use the mic, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Up in the front row, right?
Are we hearing?
Just in case. What I do in a talk, the talk will last about 45 minutes to an hour. I'll give a little bit of my background, the history of the store. I have a few things I'll show off. I'll talk about old books, things that we've had, places I've been, people I've met, the characters. And then I'll talk a little bit about Antiques Roadshow, how that show works. I hope all of you watch it, because the more of you watch it, the better the ratings, the more likely they are to continue year after year. And it's a lot of fun to do. Then, after about half an hour or so, I'll do question and answer, because I can go on and on and on and on about old books. And at least with question and answer, I can go on about what you want to listen to. The last couple of minutes of the talk, I'll end with a few stories. Then I'll end the formal part of the talk, but if anybody wants to stay, if you have any books, I'll do them all. I'll just do them a lot more quickly. In the less order, the less organization there is to that, the faster it goes. And quite honestly, the faster it goes, the quicker I get home. My wife says that even though now that I'm getting a little bit older, that I only work half a day. I get in at 5:30 in the morning, the store closes at 5:30, that's 12 hours, it's half a day. And when I come to events like this, obviously, it adds a little to it. So I really do try to do the appraisals quickly at the end, although I will do them all. I guess the first thing that comes up is a little bit of background and history of the Brattle Bookshop. The history goes back to the 1820s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married, my mother had $500, and with that they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. And my father built the store on his hard work, his knowledge, and also he was a bit of a character and a showman, and built the store. And so it's been in our family since 1949. And when my father first bought it, it was on a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. Now, to make it even more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. We get calls regularly, people in Harvard Square or Brattle Street, where are you? We tell them we're in downtown. When they built the Boston City Hall Plaza, that's where Brattle Street was. And we've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. But every time we moved, when it was a planned move, my father would move the best books over to the new location. Then he'd run sales, half price, $1.50, quarter dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever. He'd ring a big bell. They'd go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. That group would leave, the next group would come in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969, and we were moving from the end of Washington Street to West Street, where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman. And if you can sort of picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers. Go 5 West Street Brattle Bookshop." They filled it up with books, and at the time, he was at the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall. They drove it from the end of Washington Street, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, and then back down Washington Street with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic told him he would do it all morning. He was a friend. But within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He got his point across. And we've been on West Street since then. When we first moved there, we were in a 150-year-old 5-story building. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning, the building was on fire. It literally burned to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. We basically had no insurance. Matter of fact, we didn't even have enough insurance to cover the demolition of the building, so we had no insurance.
Wow.
Any of you who have commercial buildings, look into demolition insurance. You don't want it, but it might be helpful at some time. But we wanted to keep going, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors up the street. That was in 1980. We rented folding tables. People either sold us, gave us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And within a month, we reopened. It was a meager start, but the main thing was just keep going. And over the next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the store. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which is sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5. 2 floors of second used books. 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, and so on. And that type of business is a dying business. And it's not that just people go like books, buy books, read books, sell books, but particularly in the cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can guarantee you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, and one right after the other have gone out of business. Now, like I said, we bought our building in the early 80s, so I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters who are in their late 30, early 40. I don't think they have any interest in coming into this the way I have. And I've done this all my life. My parents say my first word was book. I don't know, maybe it was. I'm sure they were talking about them all the time. And then I worked after school in elementary school, junior high school, summer term college. I have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973 I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now has been over 50 years. And I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this in Northern Laboratory somewhere. And one of the fun parts about the business is going out to people's houses and estates. That's how we get most of our books. It's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island. Every day, never knowing who you're going to see, what you're going to see, the people, the places, the characters. As a matter of fact, speaking of characters, it's not always the customers or the people we go out and see, but sometimes even the people we work with us. When I first started, a few years after that, I hired an employee, and he'd been working literally a couple of days. A man came in, and as far as I was concerned, that was an older man came in. And he asked for an author, obscure. The author's name was Jonathan Yates, who was a novelist. I knew he was a novelist. We went over to the section, looked, we didn't have any Jonathan Yates books. I said to him, do you want to leave your name? At the time, we had index cards. He said, no, maybe we'll check again sometime, and left. And my new employee comes up to me and says, does that man come in here often? And I said, you know, I really wasn't paying that much attention, but I don't know. He says, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And here's the same employee, one of the most memorable introductions we've ever had. About a few weeks after that, my wife, well, the way she likes to put it, she worked for the local professional basketball team. So we had a few extra tickets to go to a Celtics game. So we had 4 tickets, and I said, Hugh, we've got 2 extra tickets. Do you want to come to the game with us? He says, sure, but give me the tickets, I'll meet you there. My wife and I get to the game, he's sitting there with a woman, and he goes, I'd like you to meet my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? I mean, this is 50 years later. I'm still, and this employee worked for us for years, and nothing ever changed in any case. But going out to the houses and estates, it is how we get most of our books. Main reason people sell books is either it's an older person couple moving from the big house to the small, or it's an estate There's every other reason you can think of, but those are the main ones. And going out to the houses is fascinating. And I'll tell a few stories about some of those spots, then I'll tell some more stories about other things. I was out in the store, again, this was a while ago. I got back and there was a message that a Mrs. Fisher had called and had some books. I called her up and she said, oh yes, my father died in Providence. He has 500 art reference books. We want to invite a number of dealers down to bid on. Would you be interested? And 500 art reference books sounds like a nice library. Providence is only an hour away. I mean, we go all over the Northeast, all over New England. An hour really isn't that much. Matter of fact, it took me 2 hours and 20 minutes to get here tonight because there was an accident on the express. But so an hour is not. Anyways, they lived in an old street called Benefit Street up near Brown University. I got to the house. It was a large old colonial house. I got through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after about 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I wanted. I was pleased. She was happy. And she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction. But would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport is one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me to this. But one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of those mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering from the basement to the attic, all on my own, without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, don't mix this, it was just fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, when I come to groups like this, I do hundreds of free appraisals. At the store, all day long, people are calling, coming in, asking about that. Now emailing, sending pictures, and so on. And we do hundreds. Antiques Roadshow, do loads of free appraisals. But there are times when people need very formal written appraisals for insurance, estate taxes, whatever. Then we discuss the fee. In any case, another mansion in Newport, not as big as the Browns. This was the Perry family. Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it. But it was the day-to-day accountings of the ships. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of the page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was why I heard the captain. So you never know what you're going to see and so on. In the characters, and when my father was still alive, and he died in the mid-'80s, we got a call from a lady, and she was very vague about her name and who she was and what she had. And but it sounded like there might be something there. And she lived in Sharon, so it was fairly close. We got out to the house, and it was a little ranch house. Paint was peeling, weeds were growing. And we sort of said, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there are just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. And artwork and so on. In any case, it turns out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution. And she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues and all the goings on, how T.D. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle, but there was a lot more to it. T.D. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out the books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into her house, on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors. They were about this size, pastoral European scenes. And when I first saw them, I thought they were nice. And the more she talked, and the longer we were there, and the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, oh, those 10 watercolors, they're really nice. And she sort of turned turned around and said, oh yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner watercolors, probably $1 million worth of painting. And it was like, oh yes, you know, so you never know what you're going to see. And matter of fact, speaking of characters, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to speak in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? He said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo is a whole lot further than that now. And here's a man who can tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. And he said he was really looking forward to this dinner and the learning and insight. He said he was excited about it. He got there a little bit early. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was elderly, had one of those big, huge horns for hearing, sat down opposite, and he said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, "My Tom, you look very good." And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, "It's the Carter's little liver pills." This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. He said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on this track. I'll tell one more on this story, and then I'll get on to a little bit different subject. We get hundreds of phone calls. People wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. And most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer right off the top of our heads. Some are a little involved, and occasionally you really have to do some research, but that can be fun. But every once in a while you get a call that really stands out. And again, this was a while ago. I answered the phone, "Hello, Brown Hill Shop, can I help you?" Lady, elderly, very thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, "President Kennedy slept with me." So you have to admit that gets your attention. She starts and waiting for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked with the Kennedy family. When he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first. So what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, presidential letters of any type have value. Handwritten letters are even more and rarer and harder to get. She wanted to get an offer on them. I was actually very skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was great. The letters were fabulous. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous value offer. Much as I suspected, though, there was no way she could sell these letters. They were part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has it. Probably where they belong. Who knows? Maybe someday I'll hear about them again. One of the things that comes up a lot is a couple of questions that people normally ask me. What are some of the more valuable or high-priced or rare things that you bought? Do I collect books? And so on. But as far as what I think my most valuable book is, one of the stories I end the talk with, I'll talk about that specifically. But some of the things that have sort of been stand out, and we got a call once to do an appraisal, and some of these are things that not that I've owned, but I've had to appraise or whatever. And I got a call from a museum. I was a member. They said they had this item. They needed an appraisal on it. They needed it because they were loaning it to another museum for an exhibit, and you need insurance while it's out of their place, so they needed a value. They told me what it was, and I said to them, "Sure, I'll do it for free. I'm a member. I'm happy to help. But I don't want to do it from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I would like to see the original." And they said, "No problem. You'll make an appointment, come in." I went and made an appointment. And there I'm holding a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. You know, I mean, the fact that that even exists, and as you're reading through it, they told me to get off my horse so they'd blow my head off, and all that. I mean, literally, 4 pages, just something amazing. And I got to hold it, touch it. And even though I deal with maybe not that level of thing every day, even though when you touch a letter of Washington, Lincoln, Einstein, whoever, it still can send the chill up your spine, and so on. And another time, I got called to a library, a college library, to do an appraisal. Now, like I said, I have a degree in chemistry, and they had some rare books, some of them scientific. And one of the things I'll mention that probably most people wouldn't think of. In any case, one of the books they had was a first edition of Principia Mathematica, done in the 1600s, which is Isaac Newton's first edition, which is the basis of modern mathematics. The book itself, in good condition, is worth $1 million. This was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes and the margins. And not only that, when I was appraising it, I was in Isaac Newton's study, looking at it. But what the part that you might not think about that, I was also in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Most people, Roger Babson collected everything he could possibly collect of Isaac Newton. He was a very rich financier, and one of the things in his collection is he had bought Isaac Newton's study and moved it from England to Babson College. Now, Babson College, I don't know if you call them up and say, can you see the study, whether they'll really want you to, but I was literally in Isaac Newton's study. Now, that copy went from Babson to MIT, and then it went to Pasadena, the Huntington Library. I was at a book show in Pasadena, and my wife and I went to the Huntington Library and Gardens, which, if you're there, go. The gardens are spectacular. I mean, really spectacular. And then the library and the artwork. But we went to it. There was a glass case. There was that copy. They wouldn't let me pick it up and hold it again, but I could say I picked that up once. I got a call. This was a museum. My manager and I got a call. It was a 1960s building. They took us down the basement. There were folding tables. On one of the folding tables was the Bill of Rights, the Pilgrim Charter, and then a Declaration of Independence. I know you're going to have a talk on the Declaration. But this was one done a year later. It was the first one ever printed with the names of the signers, because that was actually, they were traitors. If England had won the war, having your name printed there was not the thing. But it was the first one. It's done in Baltimore, printed actually by a woman. But when you looked at it, in ink, across the top, it said, "This is a true and authentic copy, John Hancock." And I have to admit, I did put my little finger on each one of them. Now, the reason where that was is at the Kennedy Library. If you go across the parking lot a few feet, the state archives are there, and they were creating their museum. And so all those things are in their museum now, and you can see them. But the reason they needed them appraised is before they opened the museum, they had to have a little bit of restoration done on them, and they wanted to get an idea of when it was out of their things, out of their possession, what to insure it for. One of the things, though, that I found even more fascinating, where they were restoring them was in North Andover, so they had to drive them up in 93. When they drove them up 93, the state police did it in a motorcade and shut down 93. They did not want any other vehicles on the road, and they did that when they came back, too. That I didn't see, but can you imagine? And then we've had things, myself, I one time bought in Belmont. They had a trunk of something up in the attic. We were going through it, and at the bottom of the trunk was a large middle envelope with 10 letters of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and so on. And I brought one of the letters home to show to my daughters, and it was interesting. It was a letter that he was talking about, what do you do about traitors and terrorists? And this was just after 9/11. This was during the War of 1812. And Jefferson said they should get the full protection of the law and absolutely nothing else. But my daughter at the time was in the 5th grade, I think. She said, "Can I take it for show and tell?" And I said, "No, you really can't." And so, in any case, people ask, do I collect books? And really, I don't. And one of the reasons I don't is when I was growing up, my father would bring home 5, 6, 7 books a day. Do that for 30 or 40 years. And you can imagine what our house looked like. It was heaps and piles. And, you know, he always meant to read a chapter, an introduction, the dust jacket, whatever, but just piles. So I tend to read a lot. I read a lot about books and book collecting. I read a lot about local history. I read Stephen King and John Grisham and all of those. Matter of fact, John Grisham did one called Camino Island that I particularly like. If any of you read it, you'll probably figure out why I like it. But I take them, I read them, I return them. But when you ask, do I collect books? Well, yes, but my wife had a collection of over 1,000 books on jazz and American roots music. So we had 1,000 books of that in the house. She also had signed studio photos of musicians, and she had some great ones. She had one that U.B. Blake signed to W.C. Handy. Her favorite one was one that was a marquee picture. It wasn't a person, but the marquee was Louis Armstrong Band, and then reading down featuring Billie Holiday. And it was signed to Pops who taught me everything about Billy. Any case, we downsized a few years ago. We brought in some of the pictures. A colleague of ours from London walked in, said, I want all those. I have a customer. And she said, well, we have 1,000 books too. She said, drove out to our house, said, I'll take all those, sent them, sold them to a customer. The next thing we heard about it was that the customer's wife didn't like the collections, we had to build a room in the basement, sort of like a man cave with all these jazz books. We didn't hear anything about them again for a number of years. There was an auction, someone had died, there was an auction. We looked, there was some of her books, it was Charlie Watts, who was the drummer for the Rolling Stones, who brought the collection. So it was like filled out the circle. There were books, dust jackets on modern books started really around World War I. Now, dust jackets go back to the early 1800s, but they were literally just plain dust jackets. But dust jackets, as we know, but before that, a lot of publishers would put out books with very decorative covers. And the reason they did that is they figured if you walked in a bookstore, the cover caught your eye, better chance you buy it. And there are people who collect books like this just for the decorative covers. And you can go to library sales, historical society sales, auction houses, bookstores, flea markets, and pick up a lot of these very cheaply. And individually, they might not seem like much, but decoratively, as a collection, they can be quite interesting. Now, there are expensive ones, so if you want to spend money, you can find expensive ones too. But actually, we had a collection of books like this that started off as a bit of a joke. One day I got a book, and it had a picture of a toilet on the cover. The title of the book was Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper. So we went to the toilet. So I brought it home, showed it to my wife. She took one look at it, said we have to put that in the bathroom. So we did. A couple of days later, I got another book that had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title of that was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but with a big eye staring at you. I said, we better put that in the back. Now, this is a little half bathroom with no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves with, and now there are 300 or 400 of these Victorian illustrated books in the bathroom. And people walk in, they're a little taken aback, but loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while a book will fall off the shelf, and you can imagine where it ends up. One collection I do have that I'm going to hold up and show you that you absolutely can't see, but I will explain what it is. There are a lot of pages here, first of all. Let me just show you that. Every page has a line, a sentence, a word, and every one of these is a story. And I collect stories about books and book collectors. Matter of fact, I assure you I won't do this, but I can hang one of these on the wall and throw darts at it, and then just tell stories. And there are a lot of interesting ones. Well, a couple of them. A lot of times when you're talking about rare books, you're always thinking how high priced and how valuable things are. But sometimes the best things are maybe not. We one time bought a collection of 2,000 cookbooks. And some of them were very valuable. They went back to the 1800s, some very important modern cookbooks. And then there was a box of these pamphlets, a display that companies would put out, like Baker Chocolate Company, how to make Jell-O, gold medal flour. And they're little, but they're colorful. They can be very nice. Some of them are collectible. But I said to the people I was working with on this, look, we've got to spend a lot of time on the rare books. Just put these out at $1. There'll be a few bargains there, but people will like them, and we just don't have the time. So we put them out at $1. About 2 hours, someone comes running in with one of these pamphlets, and this man, it was hard to describe how thrilled, how excited. He said, I've been looking for this for years and years and years and years. And he went on and years and years, and it was $1, and it goes on, and just was so excited. And then I look at it, the title is Coconuts and Constipation. You never know what people want. And let's see. I mean, I've got lots and lots of stories here. Well, here's one, and then I'll give a little bit of background about Antiques Roadshow. We get calls, and we literally go out to look at books just about every day. This morning I bought 1,000 books. Tomorrow morning at 7, we're looking at another 1,000 books, and then right after that we're getting 1,500 at another place. But people call and they make appointments. And we had a customer, and sometimes they postpone the appointments. And you know, life happens, either the sickness, business, childcare, whatever. And you know, you have to reschedule. It's a little frustrating just because you sort of blocked out that time. But what can you do? You reschedule, it just happens. Well, there was a customer of ours who was a friend of ours. And this was about maybe 25 years ago. And he had a storage area in Cambridge, and it was a very nice storage area. It had lights, it had electricity, but he had a lot of books there. He needed some money, and we said, sure, we'll go out. And we set up an appointment, and he postponed, and we rescheduled, and he postponed, and we rescheduled, and he postponed, and we rescheduled. And after 4 postponements, I said, Russ, if you postpone on us again, I don't care what you have, I am not going there. And on the 5th morning, he calls us up, and that morning he goes, we have to postpone, but it's not my fault, it's not my fault. And it turns out the lady next to him, it was a very sad story. She had had a husband who had been an abusive alcoholic. He had run out of the family 20 years before that. That night, she was literally on her deathbed, and her daughter was with her. And she said to her daughter, I have a storage area in Cambridge. Tomorrow I want you to go there. When you go to the storage area, in the storage area you'll find a freezer. In the freezer you'll find your father. She had murdered him 20 years earlier. Put him in a freezer, put him in the storage area. And I said to Russ, okay. It was on the news. I mean, the police were there. It actually, as a matter of fact, about 15 years ago, I've been telling the story, and I said, did I just make, so I Googled it, and it said, bizarre story. So I said, that's okay, that's a good excuse. So you never, ever know. And when you're dealing with people, you really don't. And, a little bit about Antiques Roadshow, and again, I say I hope you all watch it. I'm actually on this week from Salt Lake City doing Praising the Book of Mormon. But anyways, the way that show works, and one of the things that I really love about the show is we have to go all over the country. Now, a lot of people don't realize that we don't get paid. The appraisers do not get paid at all. Matter of fact, we don't get flights, we don't get hotel, we don't get meals. But what we do get is if you get on TV, they have 4.5 million people who watch the show, but there's not even a guarantee that you get on TV. Those appraisals aren't pre-staged. In any case, and also, anywhere you go in this country, I don't care where it is, I'm very fortunate that my wife usually comes with me, and we can usually go a few days early, so we actually get to see the places. Anywhere you go in this country, the people are wonderful. Do not talk about politics and religion. And this country's beautiful, and it's just been, I mean, why would you ever go to Bismarck? Why would you go to, Fargo, Omaha? But anywhere you go, it's wonderful. Anyway, the way that show works, though, is about 3,000 to 4,000 people come to a show. Each person brings 2 items. So about 6,000 to 8,000 items come into a show. They take a little over 100 of those that make up 3 hours of television from each city. But people, when they go to the show, they have to get tickets. Now, tickets are free, but there's a lottery, because sometimes they have 30,000 people apply for 3,000 tickets. So people who come to the show have essentially got the lottery. Then when they get there, they come in and they wait in line to go to what they call triage. Now, triage is a group of appraisers who do not appraise. What they do is you bring your item and they go, okay, you go to sports, you go to Bush, you go to Prince, you go to art, you go to... So they tell them where they go. And then when they get to the line that you're in, there are 3 book appraisers next to the poster appraisers next to it. But then there's a line there. So people have won the lottery, some of them have driven 500 or 1,000 miles, and then they come in and they have their items. And you have to be very nice. I mean, out of the 33 to 6,000 items, or 6,000 to 8,000 items, they only take a little over 100, and you've got to be very nice, and so on. But there is no guarantee that you're going to, as an appraiser, you're going to find something that's not only interesting, that the people don't know everything there is to know about it, that you'll be able to call a producer. Now, what happens is, the way it works is, in the ideal day for an appraiser at the Antiques Roadshow is, someone comes in at we appraise from 7:30 in the morning, sometimes till 7 at night, almost nonstop. But someone comes in at 8, 9 in the morning, they have something interesting, you call a producer over, the producer comes over, they talk to the appraiser out of earshot of the person, say, why do you want to put this on? Then they talk to the person to get a sense of what they're like, whether they've been on it, and so on. And then ideally, the producer says, yes, go tape it. By 9:30, 10 in the morning, you tape something, it makes the rest of the day go really easily. But if it's 4 or 5 in the afternoon and you haven't taped, it gets very tense and chances are you might not get on. Now, there was one city that I remember, and it was Kansas City, and a man came in at about 9 in the morning, and he had a few nice things from Pope John Paul. I mean, he had some rosary beads, he had a few things signed, but there wasn't really that much there. But then, it turned out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country. So he started telling stories of what was going on behind the scenes, and it was starting to get fairly interesting, and so on. And then he pulls out some 8 by 10 pictures again. Now, usually when you get a picture taken with the Pope, it's very formal. And what will happen is, the Pope will be standing there in his vestments. He'll have his hand out with his ring. People kneel, they kiss the ring, they get a picture taken, and it's a very formal thing. He starts pulling out pictures, and he had a picture of himself in his cockpit, in his pilot suit. with the Pope literally in his vestments, standing there and with his arm on the back of the chair, with his leg up in the air, reaching over and signing his Bible. And I'm going, oh, this is fabulous and great. And I said to the man, okay, let's see the Bible. And he goes, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you get it? He goes, it's a safe deposit box. It's Saturday, no. And I'm going, ah! Now, later in the day, I did tape something else, but it was like, oh, that would have been so perfect. There's a lot of interesting things that come in. And actually, one of the hard parts when you're doing these kinds of appraisals, many times could be, and when I first started doing this, you thought, yes, if you tell somebody, like I did the lady on this week's Antique Roadshow, that her Bible, her Book of Mormon was worth $50,000 or $60,000, and to the LDS collectors and so on, it's fabulous. But what do you do when someone comes in and it's worth nothing, or $1 or $2? It's actually, over the years, I've learned that you do it very nicely. But if someone can say to someone, oh, that's worth a couple of dollars, or it's sentimentally valued, most people are absolutely happy. They go, great, now I don't have to worry about it anymore. I can give it to the grandchildren, I can give it to the Historical Society, I can read it, and it's like you freed them, and so on. Now, obviously, you say it's worth $50,000 or $100,000, but people are actually very happy many times to hear. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Now, my wife, and also when you do appraisals here, or in any group or any setting, 95, 98% of the people usually are happy. Whatever you say, there's things that you do, but you can never make everybody happy. And this was a case, my wife did appraisals at the Antiques Roadshow for 2 years, but she did not enjoy standing at there for 12 hours and so on. But one of the times when she was there, and again, you have to be nice. I mean, a lot of times I can look down the road and go, crap, crap, crap. Oh, wait a minute, I'll look at you. No, because the people, like I explained, have gone through a lot, we want to be nice to them. And so she was there. Lady came in, and I don't remember what city it was. The lady came in, and she says, I have a book signed by A. Lincoln. And my wife took the book, looked at it, and, spent a little time, and she says, it is signed by A. Lincoln, just not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be. And the lady in this tone goes, how can you tell? And my wife said, she said the first clue, and she turned to the title page, she goes, this book was printed in 1911. And the lady said, so? And my wife said, well, I learned that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. Lady slammed the book shut, said, you don't know what you're talking about, and stormed off. And, when someone in their mind has an idea, no matter what that idea is, if that's what they believe, and that's what they want it to be, and that's how they want it, almost no matter what you say, no matter what reason, you cannot convince them that that's not it. And so that does happen. I'll tell you, I can go on and on and on, but why don't I see if there are some questions? And quite honestly, anything you ask me, I can go off on a tangent. Does anyone, tell you what, why don't I take you in the back and then I'll come on.
I was wondering, you talked about that document that Paul Revere had written.
Yeah.
Where would that document be? What museum was that?
Well, right now it's actually been loaned again to, they're having an exhibit at the Old State House in Boston from the 250th anniversary, so it's going to be in that exhibit, but it's the Massachusetts Historical Society. Okay. And now the Massachusetts Historical Society is up Boylston Street near the Fenway. The stuff they have there is absolutely incredible. But I know that it's going to be in an exhibit at the Old State House when they put up the 250 exhibit.
Because
But
I'm sorry.
one of the things they have at the Mass Historical, I asked them if sometime when I'm there they'll pull it out, but when you were talking about the Declaration of Independence, Massachusetts Historical Society has 4 handwritten drafts of the Declaration, all in Thomas Jefferson's handwriting. And the one they really like is the one that has John Adams's notes in the margins. I mean, they said they'd pull it out for me to let me see it one time. But Mass Historical Society has one of the greatest collections of American history. They also have the second best collection of Thomas Jefferson other than the University of Virginia. And I actually one time had to go to the house of the lady. Now this is see what I can tell you about? A lady called me, she called a colleague of her, not mine. Her last name was Lastavica. And she went into one of our colleagues' bookstores, who was the old Yankee at the time. This is 25 years ago. Said, could you tell Mr. Well, it's good speak, they're not in business anymore. Could you tell him that Mrs. Lastavica wears and things? He didn't come out for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. She said, could you ask him again? And they said, what's your name again, Lastavica? He didn't come out. She ended up through someone else calling me. Well, yeah, her married name was Lastavica. She had 150 acres of land in Manchester by the sea on the ocean. Her father's name was Thomas Jefferson Coolidge, who are the direct descendants of Thomas Jefferson. They gave all of that material to the Massachusetts Historical Society. But one time when I was out there, again, my wife came with me on this one, and if you go into their dining rooms, and they were Copley and Sargent, not Johnson and Sargent, but Stewart, Stewart paintings. And each one was relatives. And she said, oh, that's Colonel Lippman, he's doing a lot of land in Cambridge. And so on. So anyway, so we sit down. I don't drink coffee. I had a cup of coffee 48 years ago. I yelled at my wife. I have had 1 cup of coffee since. And I was just she said, would you like a cup of coffee? And you couldn't say no. She brought it out. She had a nice service. As we were picking up the cup of coffee, my wife said to the lady, gee, that's a really nice coffee service. And we're halfway up, and she goes, oh yes, it's Thomas Jefferson's. And it's like, you know, almost you froze. But, so, you meet interesting people. So, that's the one answer. You had a question? Yeah.
Yeah, so have you ever thought about writing a book, or does anybody else?
The question is, have I ever thought about writing a book? Problem is, when I speak, I can tell these stories with a lot of enthusiasm and so on. My writing is flat. I mean, it's a whole other talent. I mean, you know, someone like Doris Goodwin can sit there and write history and make it thrilling and interesting. I write these stories down and they're boring. So I do a podcast. Matter of fact, there's some cards back there called Rattlecast. I have about 200 20-minute or so episodes just telling and saying the stories. But writing is a whole other talent that I don't enjoy. Maybe some point I'll sit down with somebody and record it and let them do it. But right now, I at least have the basics.
I'm sure that there's somebody somewhere that would love to collaborate with you.
Well, there is, but I have to sit down and do that past it anyways.
How do you authenticate some of these things? Like, in my mind, you have to have these special machines that, you know, do an ultrasound of them. How do you tell, looking at a document, that it's original?
Well, when you're saying authenticating documents, authenticating signatures, handwriting, first of all, nobody knows everything. You just can't. And actually, if you do everything, it would get boring. So in many cases, you don't have to know it. You just have to know who does know it. and you have to be on good enough terms with them that they'll actually answer you. So that's one of the main ways to do it. But first of all, when you see 90% of the documents you see, signatures you see, all of that, are almost definitely real because they have no value. There'd be no value in anybody forging it. You know, there's no reason to. But when you start getting into higher priced, higher value things, some of it you've seen so many times that you can tell. You know, you might not be able to tell 100% what's real, but you can look very quickly and say, this isn't. Or historically, does it make sense? I mean, did Abraham Lincoln sign it in 1911? Chances are no. But even when you get into letters like the George Washington or General Patton or whatever, you have this wonderful letter, and then you say, wait a minute. On that day, they were 500 miles from there. They couldn't do, you know, so that gets into it. It historically doesn't make sense. A lot of times, it's very obvious the paper it's on isn't right. But it can be, things can look very, very right. And again, you can convince yourself because you want it to be right. So that's when you start saying, like you'll take a picture of it and now you can email it to a colleague and say, what do you think? And almost every time you do that, it's not right because you, in the back of your mind you're saying something's wrong. So that's it. And then if you get into the very, very high price items, yeah, then you can start checking the inks, the paper, and go into it a lot more in depth. But the more value, the more checking. And there are people who, well, here's what I tell people. If you think about it, the best forger in the world, by definition, you would never know. Because they wouldn't be the best forger in the world if you could tell that they were forging. So there are things that can just pass through that you wouldn't know. There are also things like auto pens. There's been a lot about auto pens. But, you know, or secretary signing. So when you, especially Kenneth, when you look at things signed by him, you really, really, really have to be careful. Because he had so many secretaries signing, so many auto pens signing, that there's whole books just showing how Secretary 1 signed his name, Secretary 2, Secretary 3, how auto pen 1, so yeah, you do get involved in that, and it can get a thing. And one sort of story about, there was a very famous case about 15 years ago, they wrote 3 books about it, that a man was forging Mormon Latter-day Saint documents. But it was a tricky thing that he was doing because he was forging letters that never existed, but that called into the foundation, caused problems with the foundation of the whole religion. And then he would sell them to the church, who would put them in a safe where nobody could see them because they didn't want the whole foundation of the church. Well, it turned out they were all forgeries. It turned out he murdered 2 people in Utah who were getting on to what he was doing. And so he is now securely in jail in Utah. And if you defrauded the church and murdered people, he is never, ever, ever getting out. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just, you were saying how that's a lot of people come to the roadshow and they don't know if they're going to be. I see people with these huge pieces of furniture and stuff. What are they?
Well, what does happen in the roadshow, almost everything there is just come in and you see it at the time. There are a few pieces of furniture, the larger furniture, that people send in photographs of, and they'll go through. And if it's something that they think an appraiser might want to do, they'll bring 3 or 4 of those to the show. And there are a couple of other things that they'll bring in early. And the reason they do that is the show starts at 7 in the morning, but people are just let in at 7. That means the camera crews are all standing there waiting. So they do try to get a few things in early that, not that anyone's really studying closely, just so they can start filming at 7 in the morning. And then by 9 or so, they start getting the regular things. And there are maybe 4 or 5 things like that come in. They might not get used on TV, but at least they're starting the process. And some of those, and they will not do grandfather clocks. They're too fragile to move. So you'll never see it unless someone has put it in their pickup truck and driven it to them. Any other? Okay, I'll do one more question, then I'll tell my last couple of stories.
So how do you, if you have 5,000 books, how do you organize them so that people can screen through and say, oh, that looks good, or that, or how do
You mean the first one?
Yeah.
Well, okay, the main, and this comes up a lot. People call us up or ask questions, and the interesting way it usually goes is someone says, I have an estate that I'm settling for a relative, or we're moving. And our first question is, well, about how many books do you have? And the usual first answer is a lot. and then we ask, well, is there any particular type, kind, subject, area, things? They go, yes, we have fiction and nonfiction, which is every book ever done. So we try to, if someone then says, so let's say, I have 500 books on the South Shore of Massachusetts. Nobody's collected 500 books on the South Shore of Massachusetts without having good books, because they're concentrated. Or it might be 200 books on one specific subject. Usually, the more specified this collection is, usually the better it is. So if someone starts saying that, that's one thing. Also, when you're looking at a book, usually the less the book's about, the better the book is. If you have a 200-page book on all of world history, it is probably not a detailed history. If you have a 200-page book on the history of Scituate, it probably has a lot of history in it. So that's one thing. Also, if a book is published at the time that it's about, it usually is better. A book on the American Revolution printed in the 1770s or 80s is usually more valuable than one printed in the 1970s or 80s. So that's one thing. A book that's early in an author's career is usually more valuable. Stephen King's first book, Salem Lot, or some of the very first, they weren't known then. The first Harry Potter book in England was a relatively limited printing. They never expected it to sell. It was given to libraries. Most of them got read to pieces. A fine first edition can sell in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But by the time you get to the last Harry Potter book, the first edition was 10 million copies. They're never going to be very valuable. But what I tell people is, get a sense of what you have. But nowadays, by far, the best way to deal with it is, let's say there was a book shelves here. Get a digital camera out, maybe 2-3 shelves at a time, take a picture. If I can read the spot in focus, that's an important part. You don't believe how many photos people have that are in focus. Also, still photos are way, way better than videos, because people either don't hold their hand, or they go like this, and it's like, whoa, and it's stopping inside. So individual photos, if 2-3 shelves at a time, which can be 50, 75 books, if we can read the spines, we get a really good sense. Yes, this is something we want to go look at. These are not particularly valuable. Or wait a minute, the third shelf down, the second book from the right, then we can say, can you look at that a little more closely? So pictures are actually the best way. Although, if someone said to me, we have 300 books on trout fishing, we'd say, yes, we'll come out, or specific, but usually it's pictures are the best way. And phone number, and we can get back quickly. But we do go out just about every day doing that. And one of the things people don't realize about the profession is it's very, very physical. You buy 1,000 books in a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. You've got to carry 1,000 books. An interview for the Broward Bookshop for work is, do you have any, it starts off, do you have any sports injuries, back injuries, knee injuries, so on. The next question is, do you have any allergies to dust, mold, and then we say, well, where did you go to school, what's your background, so on. But the first two are very important. In any case, I'm going to tell the last two stories, then I'll end the talk, and then I'll informally do the appraisals and so on. I said my most valuable book, the book that I consider most valuable. There's a 1980s book, it's The Night Before Christmas. It's a very nicely done illustrated book. And that copy of The Night Before Christmas, I have read to my daughters, who, like I say, are in the late 30s, early 40s now, every single Christmas Eve, from the time they were born, still doing it, to the point where my older daughter is married to a man from Texas. I think he's very smart, they live up here. But a lot of times, Christmas time, they go to Texas. He has a wonderful family. Before FaceTime, I actually recorded myself on YouTube so my daughter could see me on Christmas Eve reading from that copy of The Night Before Christmas. My other daughter, who has a 3-year-old, he's 4 now, he just turned 4 and 1-year-old, lives in Nairobi in Kenya. So what I do is, first of all, you've got to allow 8 hours difference in time, and then 1 and 4-year-olds go to bed at like 7. So you got to read The Night Before Christmas the day before Christmas. But from that copy, I have read to them every single night along with my daughter. That copy of Night Before Christmas means more to me, is more valuable, more precious than any other book that I have, to the point where my daughter here keeps it. She says, so you can't sell it, but I can't lose it. And recently, in August, CBS Saturday Morning did a feature on me in the store, and I wanted to bring that in so that they could see it. And I had to ask her permission. Emily, can I bring this in so that I can tell the story? And they did use it. And then she's made me immediately come back, give it back to her. So
You should video record.
well, just watch CBS Saturday. Well, just watch CBS Saturday Morning. You can go online.
When was it, last August?
It was in August, but it's on our website. If you go to Broward Bookshop, you'll see on the front page, there's a link. And unfortunately, the announcers got fired. And I'm not sure why. Yeah, a new company. The last story I'll tell is about the Bible. And the reason I like to finish talking about the Bible is the Bible is the most commonly printed book of all time, always has been, probably always will be. And we at the store, we get 5-10 people a week with 100, 200-year-old Bibles. And in almost all those cases, we have to say to them, if this is your family Bible, it's been handed down through the generations, sentimentally, it's priceless. Monetarily, it might not be worth much. If you have one of those big, huge, old family Bibles that has beautiful glass, leather bindings, those can sell for $100 to $300 in perfect shape. Break one binding, break one clasp, they don't sell, but they make wonderful gifts for ministers, priests, divinity students. But what's valuable in a lot of those is the beginning, middle, or end. Sometimes there's family histories. And a lot of times, the local historical genealogical societies, they want to make a digital image of those pages, maybe the title page, but they don't want the whole Bible. They take up too much room. So that's one thing. And I got called to a large old church in Boston, well over 100 years old. They had a huge library, probably the size of this room on 3 levels. And they just wanted to know if over the years they had accumulated any valuable books. I spent a day there. They actually had some nice books. It was fun. And at the end of the day, the priest said to me, can you come down the basement? There's some more books. Went down the basement. There was some more books. Then there was, in the corner, there was a room, maybe like, well, it was a closet, more a room, maybe the size of that coat room over there. Of course, I don't know how big that coat room is. Anyways, floor to ceiling, top to bottom, front to back, it was stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I said, well, what is this? He says, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. And we go downstairs, open the door, put it in the dresser. He says, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and throw it away. That would be just terrible. So I use it as an example to say that if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, fabulous. But if not, you're really not doing anyone a favor. Again, I have a card here. It has all our information. Listen to the broadcast if you're willing to say you like it. But in any case, there's about over 200 episodes. And if you also our website, brownbookshop.com, has a lot of this information. My wife sets that up. She does a great job, but it has a lot about the store, about books and so on. But the main thing I'll say is, if you have any questions or books, ask. We would much rather have 100 people call with nothing special and it doesn't bother us, than have the 101st person say, I threw away, and you go, oh. So don't ever feel you're bothering us. We do this all the time. We like to do it. On the appraisals, the way I do it is just in a crowd scene. If somebody wants to stand over my shoulder and listen to what I'm saying, great. But it's the fastest way, and like I say, I get to work at 5:30 in the morning. I want to get home, but I'll do it all. I'll say thank you, though, and that's